Everyone, and on behalf of the Village of Cary and the Board of Zoning, Planning and Appeals, I'd like to hereby call this meeting to order on this Thursday, December the 12th, 2020 at approximately 7:05 p.m.
How about December 10th, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you for the correction, Mr. Graziano. December the 10th. Just want to make sure you're all paying attention.
Yeah, okay, you got us.
We have a quorum of members via a hybrid model this evening. We have a number of people here at Village Hall, as well as members joining us via the Zoom application. And at this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Simmons to please call the roll.
Williams? Kretschmer?
Here.
Graziano?
Here.
O'Loughlin?
Here.
Dudek?
Here.
Jasper?
Here.
Walrath?
Here.
Corey?
Here. Thank you very much, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to rise with us for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So, gentlemen, you'll recall from our last meeting, this first application was a continuation from our November the 12th meeting. That's maybe where that date came from. And before we do that to our petitioner, I'm just going to step you through. I know you're saying you're not familiar with some of the technology, but the way the process works is that we're going to ask Mr. Simmons to give us an overview of your application, and then members of the ZPA may have some questions for Mr. Simmons. And then upon conclusion, we'll ask you to provide additional commentary or color around your application, and members of the ZPA may have some questions for yourself, Mr. Propati. And then once we conclude that portion, we're here in Village Hall and there's no public assembled, but we are required to open it up for public comment. There is a possibility that someone could join us via the Zoom application, and I'll ask Mr. Simmons when we get to that portion just to double check if anyone's joined us via the Zoom application. Once we close the public portion, the ZPA members may have some questions amongst themselves. We take a vote, and then that vote is delivered back to our elected officials. So that's our process tonight. And before we begin, Mr. Pravati, do you have any questions about the process?
No, I got the package from Brian and went over it earlier today and understand what the procedure is.
All right, excellent. So we just have an administrative matter that I need to address here, and then we'll go right into your application. So, gentlemen, I'm assuming everyone did receive their packages, and specifically, you have your meeting minutes from the last meeting that we conducted on November the 12th. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. So I'm going to do a general consent on each of the meeting minutes, gentlemen. So on the first case of ZPA 10001, that was the Village of Cary map amendment. Those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you, gentlemen. The second approval for meeting minutes is the ZPA case 10003. This was for the Cary Consolidated School District, and it was for the conditional use of an electronic message monument sign. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, gentlemen. And then the last item that we had was the village case 10004. This was for Hometown Scoop, and it was a variation for a wall sign, inconsistent with existing signs in a multi-tenant building. Those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, any? Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. So at this time, I will call now village case number 20 ZPA 10002. This is for Mr. Anthony Propati, excuse me, and he's seeking a setback variation for off-street parking pad, and the address is 483 Mildred Avenue. And at this time, we'll ask Mr. Simmons to give us an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As mentioned, this request is for the property of 483 Mildred Avenue. Petitioner is seeking approval for variances that are related to the construction of an off-street parking pad on the property. Brief overview of the site. The property is zoned R2 single family. It is part of or is originally Lot 26 of the Janus Fox River subdivision, which was approved around the 1910s. The subject property is a little unique, and we'll get into some of the details of that through the presentation here, but the original home was built on the property in 1912, which is located on the rear of the site, closest to the river. In 1932, a second single-family home was built on the property closer to its Mildred Avenue frontage. And shortly thereafter, in the mid-1940s, the property was subdivided into two separate lots. And at that time, those lots were deeded to various members of the family that owned the entire parcel, and created two lots which were of equal size, but also provided provisions for ingress and egress from one parcel to the other by the creation of a 10-foot easement that's maintained along the east property line on both properties. That easement on the property which is closer to the street, which will, for simplification purposes, refer to as Lot A, provides access for individuals that own Lot B in the rear of the property to access that site through the Lot A, but also the easement which is located in Lot B allows the owners of Lot A to access the Fox River as well. In researching this particular property, there's a number of non-conforming issues that exist, which kind of predicated the need for the variation for this request. Per the village's ordinances, both lots are considered lots of record within the village's Unified Development Ordinance. However, Lot A, as you can see in this slide, is identified primarily is non-conforming from a standpoint of its overall lot width. The minimum requirement for the R2 district is 60 feet, and the subject property is only 50 feet in width. And likewise, it has a couple of accessory structures that were built in the rear of the property, which are located within the required setback for accessory structures in that side yard of 5 feet, where they're essentially constructed along the property line. The red hashed area, which you can see on the slide here, shows the buildable area as far as the front and rear and side setbacks. So the existing home, which is on that lot, complies with those requirements as far as where it can be situated on the property. Lot B, on the other hand, is a little bit more complex from a code perspective. Again, this was the original home that was constructed on the property, but by the subdivision which occurred in the 1940s, under current code, the Lot B would not be a permitted lot within the Unified Development Ordinance, primarily because it does not have direct frontage to a street. So the lot by itself is a non-conforming lot without that street frontage. Again, the lot is non-conforming as far as overall lot width as well, with the 50-foot lot width. With this property being a lot defined within our Unified Development Ordinance, even without the street frontage, it still would need to comply with the village's requirements for front and rear yard setbacks, which this slide indicates, again, in the hashed area, what the required buildable area would be as far as where the structure can be situated. This property by itself is non-conforming from the setback standpoint, that the home encroaches into that required front yard setback. And there are various accessory structures which are also constructed within that area, that front yard, and also the home is shifted further to the west so that it's in the required 8-foot side yard setback. It is not conforming on its west end as well. So that's a summary of the existing conditions that are present here. And the petitioner is seeking this evening to construct a additional parking pad for the use of Lot B, as the subject properties right now do not have off-street parking areas constructed. There are no attached or detached garages, and all the parking of vehicles occurs on the 10-foot easement coming into the property. The petitioner has proposed, as part of their documentation submitted, is seeking to construct a 28-foot by 18-foot concrete pad for temporary parking vehicles on the property. Would result in about an area of roughly 520 square feet. The proposed parking pad will cross the property line, which divides Lot A and Lot B. And as a result of that location would require variations to both properties for its construction. Specifically for Lot A, a parking pad is required to be set back at least 5 feet from a rear property line. And with it being constructed across the property line would require a variation to reduce that setback from 5 feet to 0 feet. Likewise, a parking pad would need to be set back from the interior side yard setback line or property line a minimum of 8 feet per the Unified Development Ordinance regulations, and they're proposing to reduce that down to 1 foot, which would be consistent with the setback requirement for a driveway. For Lot B, the variation again would be to reduce the front yard setback variation, as the proposed parking pad in that property would be located in its required front yard from 30 feet to 0 feet for the parking pad. And then the same variation would be requested for the side yard for the setback to the adjacent park property. The petitioner provided a response to within the packet for the various variation standards which are found in the Unified Development Ordinance. Specifically, the ordinance lists various standards that need to be met in order to support variations. Summarized on the slide, which include the hardship was not caused by was caused by unique circumstances relating to the land and not the general conditions of the district. The applicant has not taken any action that has caused the extraordinary condition and made it substantially worse than otherwise might have been. The relief proposed will not alter the character of the locality and is consistent with the general regulations, purpose of the comprehensive plan and village's regulations. Based off staff's review of the information provided and the unique nature of this property with its history from a development standpoint and also its nonconformity from a subdivision standpoint, staff believes that in this case the variation standards in this area have been satisfied or is comfortable with them being satisfied, and should the zoning board concur with that assessment, would recommend that the ZPA recommend approval of the motion as presented on the slide, which include a approval of setback variances related to the construction of a 518 square foot off-street parking pad for the property located at 483 Mildred Avenue, identified by the 2 PIN numbers, subject to the conditions that are listed in your staff report. Those conditions specifically just call out the variations for each parcel that would be required, but also would require that a restrictive covenant be recorded against both parcels, specifying the use of the parking pad as it would be constructed across the property line. Currently, as the petitioner will probably provide additional information, the homes are owned still by members of the same family. However, by recording that restrictive covenant, that would ensure that if ownership of either property were to change hands in the next 10 or 50 years or whatever it may be, that use of that pad is recorded against both properties so that anybody purchasing the properties would know of those restrictions. I would be happy to answer any questions the ZPA may have regarding this case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simmons. So, gentlemen, questions for Mr. Simmons?
Brian, you go back to the picture that you had up there of the property for a second.
This one?
Okay, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So is the pad proposed to be on the east side of that home then?
Yes, so the area that's kind of highlighted in darker red, close this here. This area is where the pad would be proposed. And as you can see, this is where the driveway, it's basically a gravel strip that comes in, would provide access to it. And then that easement that they have recorded against both properties would be on that same side of the property.
So I understand very unique area, seen just since I've been on the ZPA, other questions from homeowners in the area, and I recall a few when I was on the village board as well. Personally, to me, I'm thinking, for future use, and I recognize the individuals have in their letter that it's likely to go down from family to family, but there's obviously no assurance of that. My hardship here, or the hard part that I'm having dealing with just a pad is, to me, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to leave basically a gravel/grass driveway on the side of property A to access a asphalt pad between property A and property B. To me, what is a more sensible solution is to take that asphalt pad and extend it all the way to Mildred in the form of almost like a driveway. That to me makes a lot of sense. I think it dramatically improves, and I get it, it's much more expensive than what the applicant is proposing. I clearly understand that. But, you know, this doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me, to just put a pad basically in the middle of nowhere that you're still going to have to access by going over a gravel/grass road. So that's my issue, and I'm not so much thinking just for these individuals, but what happens down the road? You know, it's going to be a challenge for whoever may want to buy it. Mm-hmm. So that's my feeling.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dudek. Did you have any other comments that you wanted to offer?
I do not.
Thank you. Gentlemen, other comments about the application?
Patrick, it's Neil. Is there I didn't see the actual dimensions. Well, how far is it over on each side? Is it possible just to have it on B? If it, you know, I agree with the previous comments in that for real estate and for future issues, it's just easier to have it on one side. I think it's for the house of lot B. So why not, if you're just going to have you know, the square, why not just put it all on B if you can, is my thought.
Yeah, I think what we're going to do is we're going to probably ask the petitioner to respond to some of these questions, but I don't think we're there quite yet, and we will be in just a moment.
So what is the size of this? I'm trying to look on mine right, this pages. How far does it go on each side?
So the dimensions of the pad would be 28 feet by 18.5 feet. So that 18.5 feet is the width. If you can see the slide, would be from kind of the existing point here towards the property line. And then the 28.
So 10 feet, I think, is what I'm looking at on one of the diagrams that we have. Is 10 feet would be in lot A and 18 would be in lot B, right?
Yeah, approximately that dimension would be correct. So it's the existing house is set back.
Yes. I don't know what page it is, but that's what is in the zoning.
Yes, yes. So the encroachment on lot A would be 10 feet.
Yeah.
Brian.
Okay, yeah, those are my comments and / question. Thanks.
For purposes of clarification, though, to the question that was just asked, you can't access that pit. Let's say it was all on property B. You can't access it from the other side of the house. The only way you can access it is on that gravel driveway. Am I correct? Because I drove by it and that's what it looked like to me.
Correct. Yeah. So the only way to access the properties would be along the gravel drive that exists on the east end of the property line today. And I apologize, I'm going to mute here. Background noise. Nope. So yeah, the only way to access the property is along this gravel drive. And that's the easement that they have recorded against both properties as essentially the 10 feet on the eastern edge of both lots. So that provides, there's that restriction that this portion of this property has to be open for the owners of Lot B to be able to access this area. Similarly, there's a requirement that there's also access along this portion of the lot so that the owners or occupants of this house would be able to access the river and one of the piers that are here. Mm-hmm. So Yeah, so the only way to access this pad is from this direction. There is no other access from adjacent properties to get into it.
Any other questions, Mr. Dudek or anyone else?
So Brian and Patrick, this is Rick Water. If I had one last question, would be about the future use. I think that Rick Dudek mentioned earlier. How would the covenants that you're proposing affect a sale? This is a family property, obviously, and potential for it to be not family in the future. How would those restrictive covenants work for or be applied towards any future owner, Lot A in particular?
Certainly. So a good question. So the easement or covenant would be a document that, or a restriction that would be on the use of both properties, similar to the easement that exists now. If one of the properties were to change hands, that basically would encumber their parcel on this area specifically being utilized for parking for vehicles for Lot B. So if somebody were to purchase the property and did a title search, that document would come up and they would be aware of that requirement or that restriction as far as how they could use that portion of the site, or that the neighboring home behind them would be able to utilize that area. There are a couple of examples, which I'll just provide briefly. Other similar situations that may exist in other properties. There's also in the subdivision, there are two homes, as you can see in the slide, which are flag lots, which do actually have access to Marquette Avenue, but they do have a shared driveway that serves both of those homes. So there'd be a similar type arrangement where the maintenance or use of that driveway is shared amongst the two property owners. And they may not be the same family, it may be different, but there's a restrictive covenant that may be in place that would dictate how each property could utilize that to access their homes. And it would be a similar situation with this, by recording that against both properties. If it ever changes hands, it would come up in a title search that the new owners would be aware of that as part of the sale of the property.
Does that assuage your question, Mr. Walrath?
Yes, actually, that covers it very well. Thank you, Brian.
Mr. Simmons, I have two questions. My first one is that going back to your original slide that we've been looking at primarily, and specifically property A, if in the next year property A was sold and nothing was done today, and the new property owner of A said, I don't want you to access my property to get to B, would that be allowable if we didn't do anything with this application tonight?
No, so currently, it's a good question. So currently the easement is recorded against both lots.
Yes.
So if the properties were to change hands and the individual that purchased Lot A, that restriction already exists on their property for that 10-foot access. So they would be required to maintain that access through their property so that the owner of Lot B could still access it to get to this location. But they're restricted, that basically allows that 10-foot area on the east side of the property for ingress and egress to Lot B.
Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Simmons. And my second question is that in the package, a number of homeowners are noticed, and I don't know if anybody responded one way or the other about the request.
I did not receive any contacts from individuals, so the petitioner can provide information during his discussion if he did receive any contact as well.
Okay. So gentlemen, unless we have any other questions for Mr. Simmons, I'm going to now turn the application over to the actual homeowner, which is Mr. Prapati. And I don't know if you'd like to offer any other comments or color around the application, but I think you probably heard some of the ZPA members have some questions, and I'm not sure which way you would like to proceed, but we'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for all the consideration. Brian, in your package, when it started with my request, there is a second page with a color diagram that shows A and B. It's a little different than the one you're showing in your presentation here. Is that available by any chance?
Speaking of this diagram, I've broken it into two.
It was a satellite view, but it wasn't the one you're showing. Just leave that one up. Leave that one up. The one where it shows lot A and B. And I'll talk to it on this slide as well as I can. At first, I'd like to just have a little groundwork here. These cottages have always been used as summer cottages. So there really was no need to pave the whole easement because the ground was always dry and it is basically gravel. About 3 years ago, my daughter married a young man there in Cary and then settled down. And she's a facility and program manager for the Cary Park District at this time. And she started having children. So that, I don't want to say required, but my wife and I wanted to be up there to help babysit and give my daughter some time to do some of the shopping that she needed to do and take care of the kids for her on Saturday mornings. The problem became last year when we went to park because it was all snow and there was no way to blow snow. So we thought, well, maybe if we put a parking pad in there, we both have four-wheel drives and we can get to that spot in the snow. Again, remember, nobody is in the other cottage now because they're using it just as a summer cottage. So there's no need for them to even come up the driveway. So we have four-wheel drives. We can make it up the driveway, but once we get there, last year there was a foot of snow that you had to trounce through and get into the cottage with the kids and the dog, and it just made a mess. And then you go back out to the car and you're doing the same thing. You're bringing all that into the car. So we thought if we could put a pad in and just blow the snow on that pad, it would give us egress to and from the back door of the cottage. So that's the reason for putting it in. And I'll go back to the first question was, well, why not do the whole driveway? Well, because the other cottage doesn't utilize it at all. And of the multiple owners, one said, yeah, that doesn't sound like a bad idea. And the other one said, no, I really don't want to do that. Now, they have no problem with the pad, but they didn't want to go through the expense of putting in the rest of the driveway. And that talks to one issue. And why don't I want to move that pad further up on my property? Well, because of a septic field. Where the dotted line goes across the two properties. Right there on that edge of the cottage, if you come towards the river about 10 feet, you have the septic tank on the side of the cottage, and then where the septic field goes out, and then the septic field is there. You certainly don't want to put the pad, I don't know if you even can put a pad over the septic field. So that's why the location that you see it in is the best way we could address the problem. There was it talks about changing hands. We talked about, there's not much of a, you don't know if it's going to change hands, and that's certainly a true statement. However, it's been in the family since 1939. My grandfather gave the property to his 6 kids. That's when it got split into 2 different lots. And over the years, the kids had kids who had kids, and every other year we have a family reunion. Well, the last one was for 120 people. So that's how many families have been involved here. And it got to be so many owners that they decided to go back to something reasonable. So I own the front cottage and 2 cousins own the back cottage. I have a daughter who has 2.5 sons. She's got one in the basket right now. And certainly she will get the cottage and it will be passed down to her sons. And in the other cottage, they have the same situation. They have a couple of the owners my age that have children and grandchildren. And certainly, I hate to say it this way, but we probably have one of the best locations on the river, having the park next door to us. The ease of getting to the cottage down at Janus Cutoff, instead of like some of these places you need a 4-wheel drive just to get to the property. So there's no reason to get rid of it, and because of the non-conformance of the properties, I think it would be hard to sell to begin with. So that's all I can offer you on that. It's just a matter of, I don't want to say convenience. The first question on the 5 issues, the 5 zoning criteria was, what is the necessity? And the necessity is so that we can utilize it during the winter. Now, we come up typically on a Thursday afternoon, open up the cottage and do a few things around there, and then my daughter drops the kids off first thing in the morning on Friday, and we have them all day long there. And then on Saturday morning, my wife goes over to take care of the kids at my daughter's house, which is obviously right there. It's Oakwood Hills. And then my daughter can go out and do her thing. Between you, me, and the walls, her mother-in-law lives a block and a half away. So my wife, became a priority to get the cottage so it was usable during the summer or during the winter, so that she could partake in taking care of the kids also. So that's as much background as I can give you on it. I'm not sure.
So, Mr. Propati, this is Patrick Corey.
Yes.
So let me try to, I think one of the comments that was offered early on by Mr. Dudek, the photograph that we're looking at, the property to the west of yourself does appear to show some type of asphalt driveway. And I recognize and respect that, there's a cost issue here, but did this consideration get evaluated, and is it something you want to address more formally to the ZBA? Because
quite honestly, first of all, the property to the west of us has one owner, so he can do whatever he wants. In the case of our property, of the 2 owners in the back cottage, one was asked, well, why don't we do the whole driveway? And the other one says, well, because we only utilize it during the summer, and I don't want to take part in that. So for that expense. So that's why, I'm certainly willing to pitch in towards putting in that whole driveway, but that's not how their cottage wants to do it. And I can honor that. I mean, I have no problem with that as long as I can get to that pad and have a place to park my car. And during the summer, it's not like cars are going their full length of the easement. Anybody in their car just walks to the river. I mean, you wouldn't drive there. So it's not a matter of having to, utilize that whole easement for a pad. I don't know how to, let me back up here a little bit. What I was looking for to talk to, the picture I wanted to talk to was how the property is currently being utilized. If you took a look at the letter A, the bottom part of that leg, right there where you've got the arrow, there's a swing set that goes from one side of the property to the other. We as a family, consider that to be the property line. I maintain everything from that swing set to the river. They maintain everything from the swing set to the road. It's not in this picture what I wanted to show you, but let me put it a different way. The two sheds, there's two sheds on the property. One they utilize, and the one where the arrow is, I utilize. I have tools in there, I have water toys in there, lawn maintenance stuff in there. And it obviously is on their property. That's where the outhouses used to be. This goes way back. Route 83 was a dirt road when I first went up there. The outhouses were there. Well, when we took out the outhouses and put in indoor plumbing, put up a shed there, and I took that one. And my grandfather and brothers took that one, and the other cottage took this one. Now, during this time of the year, between those two sheds is where I store my boat. And at this time of the year, all the shore stations come out, and they're on my property. So my boat is stored on their property, but the shore stations are on my property. And that's how we utilize the property. As far as we're concerned, there's no lot lines. And I understand from a legal standpoint, from your standpoint, there needs to be some assurance that if anything in the future happens, that there is a way out. And I would say, as the lot is right now and non-conforming, it's still grandfathered in. And if that pad was put in and it came to having to remove the pad in order for the other cottage to sell, it's not a permanent structure. I mean, it can be dug up and dirt put back in and sod laid over it again. So I'm hoping that you can see the value in this to me, and I think a very minor I don't know how to say it, issue would occur in the future. There's just, I grew up with all my cousins here and all their kids. Grew up with my kids, and it's just a wonderful piece of property. I don't see it ever leaving.
So, Mr. Propati, let me suggest this. I think the gentlemen have a good understanding of the request here, but before I asked him to comment further, did you have any other comments that you would like to offer around this request of the variance?
No, I don't think there's anything else that would be of any value. Okay. Other than the fishing's not as good as it used to be.
All right, let me see if the gentlemen have some questions for yourself. I know I have one, but let me see if the gentlemen have any questions for you.
I don't have questions. I have comments, so I'll hold those. So go right ahead.
Gentlemen that are joining us via Zoom, questions?
I'm good at this point. Thank you.
Okay.
I just have a one. Obviously, on the I'm looking at the different diagrams that we were given, but I'm looking at Brian, what you have up right now. There seems to be a walking path. Is that? I mean, that's up to date, right? I don't see it on the plat or whatever I'm looking at on these different diagrams. Is that accurate?
Are you speaking this paved area?
No, the other one. The other one. Yeah, that. Is that concrete?
Yes.
Because I don't see it on in the packet. I see a concrete pad or slab. I see it kind of, but I don't really see that sidewalk. In relation to size, do we know, is this pad going as deep as that walking path? Is that what we're looking at?
Yes. The reason for that sidewalk, and it's been in there for a long time, is that when you pull straight up, if it's wet outside and you get out of the car, you're getting out of the car into the mud. So they put that there for the cars to pull up next to and then you could get out on pavement. The pad, you see it, the back of the cottage is where that sidewalk ends. And then it's a little wider. Yeah, that's the back of the cottage. So the proposal is to go from that point at the cottage over to the east side. And then the pad would go back not quite as far as that sidewalk, but the sidewalk would come out anyway. The pad would go over, and there'd be about 2 feet of that sidewalk left that would come out and be sodded.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure which was the right update.
As a matter of fact, if you had another view of it, you would see that where that river side of that sidewalk went towards the cottage. As it got to the cottage, there's a step up onto another concrete pad. So that other concrete pad, I remember when I was about 6 or 7 when they put that in. And then later on, they put in that little piece of sidewalk because it was just getting too muddy sometimes when you got out of the car.
Yeah, I can see it on the patio. I'm looking at Google Maps. I'm actually zooming and see a little bit better of the location. So thank you.
So, Mr. Williams, anything else that before we move on from here?
Was there ever a thought of just kind of, it looks like there's some sort of bay or, like a half circle. What about going towards the sheds or the former outhouses and just hard right versus straightforward? Would you do that?
Well, first of all, again, there's a swing set there, and the kids play in that area. And quite honestly, when there are a number of cars in there, I do pull a car in there. But I put it in on the grass during the summer because the ground is hard. During the winter, I can't do that. So that's why we're considering the pad being on the east side of that.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes with the again, family cottage. So even though I'm an owner, my sisters and brother might want to come up, and there's not a lot of room to park. So we will utilize that area as a parking area. But to put the pad in there,
I guess my question was, if it's the wintertime, there's probably not a lot of outdoor furniture and not a lot of play setting happening. So it would make sense to utilize during the wintertime the pad that is the current, add to that backyard slab that's there now, and then just take a hard right instead of adding one and maybe keeping it on the line. And obviously during the summertime, you're back to where you were. So just a thought. I don't know if that was a road down traveled.
Well, again, that's elevated. If you took that little piece of sidewalk towards the cottage, then you've got to go up a step to get to the piece of concrete that you're talking about. So they would all be raised. I think it'd just be more difficult than anything else.
Mr. Williams, did that address your question?
Yeah, I was just looking at some general ideas and comments. So thanks, I'm good.
All right.
If I could, I would take all that out and put a garage there. But obviously, that's not something we even consider. But that would be the ideal solution. But it's not going to ever happen. So again, the next best thing I could come up with was, and believe me, I spent a lot of nights trying to figure out the best way to do this, and that's what I came up with.
So, Mr. Propati, allow me to ask the gentleman if there's anyone else that has questions about your application from a ZPA perspective. And Mr. Propati, one of the questions I have for yourself is that, as I was asking Mr. Simmons, a number of people around your area have been noticed about what you're suggesting you'd like to do for your property. Did you receive any feedback one way or the other from any of the property owners?
I only got one, and it was, why do you have that sign out in front by the road? What are you intending to do? And when I told them, well, we want to put in a little parking patch. Oh, is that all? And she says, well, good luck, and walked out. No, there's nobody who has any issues with it. And all my neighbors, we talk, and what are you doing? Okay.
And before I open it up to public comment, Mr. Pravati, excuse me, do you have any additional comments you'd like to offer?
No, I'll be happy to answer any questions, but I don't know what more I can offer you that would help in making a decision on this.
All right, well, thank you. So at this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up, and for the record, there's no one assembled beyond the ZPA members here in Village Hall. So I'm double checking with Mr. Simmons to see if there's anybody online.
There's no one online.
So I will, at this time, close the public portion. And before I call the motion, I think some members of the ZPA have some comments around the application. So any questions or comments that you'd like to discuss further?
Well, my comment was this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I listened intently on everything the gentleman said. It seems to me like for roughly 80 years, nobody's wanted to make any change like is being proposed, and that when I look at the reasons for why we would grant any sort of a change to our existing regulations, and I look at the first one, and it says that, got to put the specs on, the hardship was caused by the unique circumstances relating to the land. Well, listening to the story, that's not the case. The hardship is caused by the fact that it seems now that his daughter has moved into the home, and the hardship exists because she's living there 12 months a year, and the individual that's coming, the father, coming to take care of his grandchildren, which is fantastic, is now having hardship because he's got to park in the snow and then brings dirt into the house, brings dirt into his car, all of which I totally understand. But that's not what the ordinance reads. The ordinance reads that the hardship's caused by the unique circumstances of the land. For 82 years, that hardship didn't exist. It exists now because somebody occupies a summer home 12 months a year. So to me,
I'm sorry.
Isn't that's the way I heard you describe it.
I may have misled you there. My daughter lives in town. She lives in Oakwood Hills. My wife and I right now live in Orland Park. Our intention is to move up to Cary or somewhere in that area. But I have a mother-in-law that has a bad case of Parkinson's, and my wife is her caretaker. So we can't move until that situation is resolved. But my daughter does not live there 12 months out of the year. We come up during the winter, that Thursday night, and then Friday and Saturday morning. During the summer, it isn't an issue. If we're up there and other people come up, they can park anywhere. But for those 3 days a week during the full course of the summer, winter, it becomes a problem. And it's just for my wife and myself, not necessarily for my daughter, other than she'll drive the kids over and drop the kids off.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification. Perhaps I misunderstood. I was under the impression that this is where you were coming to visit your grandchildren, so I stand corrected on that. But nonetheless, that hardship still is the same. It didn't exist until whomever wanted to come to this property B in the winter decides to do that, right? I mean, we didn't have this hardship if nobody comes there during the winter because, as the gentleman says, in the summer, when it's dry, this is all a non-issue. So to me, there exists a very logical solution. I get it. It's more expensive. It's not what the petitioner is asking for, but he has a unique property that's worth I'm sure a pretty penny to anybody if he put it on the market simply because of its access and, as he suggested, the open space to the east. I can't support it because I don't see the hardship based on the land. I see the hardship based on the use of the land. And to me, those are two different things.
Thank you, Mr. Dudek. Gentlemen, other questions? And Mr. Papadi, before I call this, one of the things that we like to do here on the ZPA is try to be open-minded and fair to the petitioners. I don't know which way this vote will go, quite frankly. But do you want the opportunity to review this further with Mr. Simmons before we call the vote tonight, or would you just like us to call the vote and see where it goes? Because once the vote's taken one way or the other, that's going to be it. It's going to go to the elected officials.
Let me just ask one question. Would it make any difference if I incurred the cost of doing that whole easement up to the cottage? I mean, I understand that changing the use of the cottage does not necessitate that there was a hardship created by the land. And it is the use of it that's creating the hardship. But earlier we were talking about, well, why don't you do the whole thing? Would that have made any difference?
I don't know, Mr. Papadi, but I'll give you my personal assessment. It sounds like it could. And I think that's kind of the logical conclusion that some of the folks were alluding to. Now, I can't speak for them. I can only speak for myself. And that's what I'm suggesting, is that perhaps you may want to follow up with Mr. Simmons. We can certainly continue the case once again to give the opportunity to review this with your family members along with the village here to see if that may help you in your quest to make this improvement and request the variance. I don't know. But it does sound like there was a lot of questions around that issue from the inception of the presentation.
Well, Mr. Chairman.
So are you asking, is it a question to me, if you are going to take a vote or wait until I talk to Brian some more?
Well, I'm going to talk to the ZPA members right now because I think there are some questions amongst the ZPA members about that question. So I'm going to allow them to speak to it.
Mr. Chairman, I was only going to say I'm 1 out of 7. That's my feeling. It may not be that my colleagues feel the same way.
I understand, Mr. Dudek. I think you're...
So I would not want to put the gentleman off if my colleagues feel differently. That's the way I feel.
I think that, in my opinion, my comments, I think if you're talking, there is a little bit of a difference if you're talking about doing an entire easement from the street to properties A and B than just putting a pad. I think if you're going to make, if we're going to do conditions and do that, I think it holds a little bit more water for the community and the value and the lots and the commonalities if you keep it the same. And that's my opinion. That's kind of where my head's at right now.
And if I can jump in here, from a recommendation standpoint, if there's an additional condition that a ZPA member wants to add to the conditions that are in the staff report, that certainly is one way that the motion can be made, so that if there's a condition as being discussed here, that a requirement for approval of the parking pad would be that the driveway that leads up to that is paved. That can be a condition that's added, and that would be one motion that could be voted upon. And if that were to fail, then a second motion potentially could be voted on that removed that condition, and that could be a second motion that could be voted upon as well at the board level, so that if that is a concern, to determine if that's an issue that all the board members will want to see, that's a way that that could be reviewed this evening, and the petitioner can move forward with the petition towards the village board with a decision this evening.
So, Mr. Papardi, I'm not sure you are completely following that, but do you understand the essence of what Mr. Simmons is suggesting, is that if we were to call the motion with the request that the driveway that we're speaking to is connected. I don't know what the material would be, cement or asphalt, whatever it is. That would be one way the motion could be called this evening. But before we start changing that, the ZPA is obviously can do that. I just want to make sure you're aware that that's what's being discussed at the moment.
Yeah, I'm fully aware of what you're proposing there. I can only suggest that the already part of this pad is on property A, which means that the driveway, the entire driveway going up to that pad is on property A. I have no way of being able to suggest that they do that so that I can put in the pad. They, on the other hand, have agreed to letting me put in the pad on the property without a concern. Again, of the two owners in there right now, one said, "Why don't you just do the whole driveway? We'll pitch in." But the other person in that said, "Well, wait a minute. We only use it during the summer, and I don't want to incur the expense of putting in a driveway and then maintaining it all the way out to the road." So that would be my only concern about not being able to do anything because one of the other members of the family says, in our case, it's a summer cottage.
All right, just bear with me a second. I just want to convene here just for a moment with Mr. Simmons.
Obviously, a asphalt or pavement driveway would increase value of both lots, just as an aside.
Well, yeah, I agree, it would. But then again, I also cannot, in my wildest imagination, foreseeing either one of these properties being sold.
Well, true, but it happens. It's already been split once, and you're already having a disagreement over this right now. So, unfortunately, I have had experience in family cottages, and I don't like to see it. And I hope to God it lasts generations for you. But in looking at as a village and a commonality, and looking at it, would make more sense. Again, this is my opinion, not my colleagues, to have all the way down to have a pad. Because what if someone else at one point wants to use it during the winter as well? I mean, it just makes sense.
So, gentlemen, this is Patrick Corey again. I'm probably going to call the motion as it stands, and if anybody wants to make an amendment to the motion, obviously you're welcome to do that. So before I do that, do we have any other questions or comments?
Brian or Patrick?
Sure. Go ahead, Mr. Jasper.
This is for Brian. When this was brought to you initially, did you look at any options that pad could be put down without having to come for a variance?
Yeah. So we reviewed the property with the petitioner, and as the petitioner mentioned during the meeting, there would be significant cost to modify the property in order to construct the pad without variations. Due to the non-conforming nature of Lot B, the pad could not be constructed in what's considered its required front yard. And to locate that further back on Lot B would be over their septic field, which would require significant modifications to be able to relocate or re-engineer that. So from a financial aspect, and from existing additions that are on the property, this is the best location for it. That would be on Lot B, but unfortunately due to size, it doesn't need to encroach into Lot A as well. But we certainly went through other scenarios to see what could be done for the construction of a pad.
Brian, go ahead, Pat.
So the placement of the septic field basically limits your ability to place the pad on a conforming basis.
Correct. So, yeah, so
Yeah.
the septic field is in this location. So in order to have a pad that they could access, that would be 8 feet off the property line and also 30 feet back off of the dividing line between the two parcels, would be forcing them to construct something in this area. And by the placement of that septic field, they cannot place it in that location.
So while it's not within all technicalities, I would say that, I would view this as that septic field, which, is not easy to move, and is unique to the property, is a hardship.
Thank you, Mr. Jasper. Was there any other comments?
Not for me.
Thank you very much.
I had one question for Brian, I guess. This is Frank. Brian, I know our and I can't find my book, I have it here somewhere, but our driveways state that they need to be concrete and or asphalt, and I know this is existing non-conformance, but since we're putting a pad basically at the end of the driveway when you look at the tracks from an aerial view, wouldn't that be considered a modification of the driveway as well? And any modification of a driveway back to conforming, would they have to do the whole driveway in pavement, or no, am I wrong?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So from a new driveway that's being constructed or installed would be required to be paved. There is no requirement within our code to grandfather existing driveways in. So existing gravel driveways that are currently within the village can remain be maintained from that standpoint, but there is no amortization date that the driveways would need to be paved by. In this case, since they're not expanding the driveway per se from the what is already providing access to the site, it's only constructing a parking pattern off-street parking area. I did not believe from a code provision that it was a requirement in that case to upgrade the driveway, but certainly if that's a condition of a variation approval, there could be a connection, a nexus between the two to require that if that's such the will of the board in this perspective.
Yeah, no, it was just a question because, I mean, the pad is technically the end of the driveway, so I didn't know if we had to look at it as a full retrofit because you're basically, you're modifying part of the driveway, but not all of it. I didn't know if there was something in code about that, but thank you. Thanks for the clarification.
Yep.
Thanks, Mr. O'Loughlin. Gentlemen, any other questions before I call the motion? All right, gentlemen, the chair will entertain a motion to recommend to the Village Board of Trustees approval of a setback variances related to the construction of a 518-foot square off-street parking pad for the property located at 483 Mildred Avenue, identified as PIN 2018-45408 and 2018-454-009, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report.
So moved. Second.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any comments or questions on the motion, gentlemen? Does anyone want to modify the motion?
I would make a recommendation to modify the motion to bring the driveway from his pad alongside property A to Mildred.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, Mr. Dudek, you're suggesting that, that the gravel road leading from Mildred would connect to the pad effectively. Is that kind of the recommendation to the motion?
Correct.
Okay. So does anyone want to second that?
Mr. Graziano would need to.
I will second that amendment or
It's
condition.
my mistake, gentlemen. It's actually to Mr. Graziano.
You prefer to amend?
I did not.
I didn't hear Mr. Dudek completely. do we want, is he stating that the driveway has to connect to the pad, or is he stating that he wants the whole thing asphalt from Mildred? That's what I was trying to.
That was my question.
Okay, so let me make sure that we're clarifying what's being, I don't want to speak for Mr. Dudek, so Mr. Dudek, maybe you can comment further.
I'm basically recommending and modifying the motion so that the entire piece from his pad all the way to Mildred alongside property A is an asphalt driveway. It's basically an asphalt driveway that ends up to the pad that the applicant is looking to construct.
Thank you, Mr. Dudek. The way you said it, I couldn't understand which way you were going there, but I appreciate the clarification.
Sure, no problem.
So I think the way the process now needs to work, and does that assuage your question, Mr. Graziano?
Yes.
Okay, so I think what we need now, if Mr. Dudek is making a request to modify the motion, I think you were first. So is this going to be acceptable to you?
To make that amendment.
No, I won't second that motion.
Okay. So there is no second to the modification.
I would second the modification, Patrick. This is Neil.
Okay. So Mr. Williams is going to second the modification. All right, so at this time, I'm going to ask Mr. Simmons to call the roll, but I'm just going to make sure that we're clear on what we're saying is that I'm going to try to lay this out as best I can, gentlemen. We're going to recommend to the Village Board of Trustees approval of a setback variance related to the construction of a 500 square foot off-street parking pad that will be connected up to Mildred Street via asphalt for the property located at 483 Mildred Avenue. Does that sound correct to you, gentlemen?
Yes.
Okay. So, Mr. Simmons, if you would call the roll against that revised motion.
Are we voting on the amendment, or are we voting on the whole?
You're voting just on the amendment for the a sixth condition?
Yes.
Would be to whether a condition to add to the motion presented would be to pave the driveway from the pad to the roadway.
That's correct.
So, Brian, I have a question relative to that. If that motion fails, do you have the opportunity to bring back the original motion and vote on the original motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so this is only on the motion to amend the original motion of the approval of the variations to add a sixth condition to require the driveway from the parking pad to the roadway to be paved. So this is only a vote on the motion to add that condition to the motion for consideration.
So solely a vote to add that condition?
Correct.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So I know it's a little bit different, gentlemen, but I want to make sure that everybody's clear on this so there's no confusion on the vote. So does anyone have any other questions on this modified motion?
No.
All right, Mr. Simmons, if you please call the roll against the modified motion.
O'Loughlin,
Yes.
Dudek,
Yes.
Jasper,
No.
Williams,
Yes.
Kretschmer,
No.
Graziano,
No.
Corey.
Yes.
So it'll be 4-3.
So we have a 4-3 vote on this, Mr. Pravati. And Pravati, please forgive me. And I'm just trying to recall if I'm on the variance.
So the next we have to do a second vote would be to vote on the full motion with conditions 1 through 5 is listed in the staff report, plus the added condition for the paved driveway.
Okay. So I'm going to call the original motion again. So I want to make sure here, Mr. Simmons, so there's no confusion for people watching this later. We just called the motion that was modified. And if I recall the vote correctly, it was 4-3
Correct.
in favor.
Mhm.
And now we're going to call the original motion.
If we
Correct.
vote, I'm confused.
Yeah, that's the point.
If you're saying that we just voted in favor of the revised motion,
We voted in favor of amending the motion to add that condition.
correct.
So there needs to be a second vote to actually vote on the recommendation, the item that's before the board here to consider approval of the request as now amended. So you've.
With the sixth
Correct. So
condition.
Yeah, so the vote would be to vote on the approval of the variances subject to the 6 conditions, the 5 that are listed in the staff report, and the 6 that was added to require the driveway to be paved.
That puts me between a rock and a hard place.
All right, so
So if I vote no, then the whole thing is, and 4 of us vote no, then the whole thing is dead. And he no longer has the option to go with the gravel driveway. He's already said he can't do the asphalt driveway.
Correct. Yeah, so if this motion were to fail as amended, there certainly could be another motion that could be presented before the board, and that could be voted on without that amendment as well. So if, from a polling standpoint, if this motion were to fail and then not have support from the majority of the members, certainly another motion could be voted upon at this meeting without that additional condition, and that could be then reviewed or pulled by the board as well.
Okay, so
you could have 2 motions.
There's still an
yeah.
option.
Correct. So if it fails to carry, then there's an option that another board member could present an additional condition if warranted.
Okay.
all right, so is that now clear to everyone involved?
Clear as
No, it's
mud.
confusing. This is a little unusual for us, so, all right, so I'm going to try to call this again, gentlemen, just so that we're clear on what we're doing. The chair will entertain a motion to recommend to the Village Board of Trustees approval of a setback variances related to the construction of a 500 square foot off-street parking pad for the property located at 483 Mildred Avenue, identified as pins 2018-454008 and 2018-454009, subject to the 6 conditions listed in the staff report. So I'm adding in that 6th modification that we just discussed.
And we already have a first and a second on that, so it would just be the vote.
Yes. So Mr. Simmons, if you'd call the vote now.
Sure. Dudek,
Yes.
Jasper,
No.
Williams,
Yes.
Kretschmer,
No.
Graziano,
No.
O'Laughlin, O'Laughlin, you're muted.
Sorry, no.
Corey,
Yes. So on this one now, we have a negative recommendation. And so I think we're back to where you were a few minutes ago, Mr. Graziano.
So do we need to make another motion to go with the recommendation to approve with only the first 5
yeah, so the motion that,
as originally presented?
correct, so the motion that was just voted upon failed to carry, so that included the 6 conditions. If there is another motion that a board member would like to make with just the 5 conditions, that can be reviewed and voted upon.
I would make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Graziano. Does we have a second for that?
Second.
Thank you very much. So now we will call a third vote, Mr. Simmons.
Okay. Jasper,
Yes.
Williams,
No.
Kretschmer,
Yes.
Graziano,
Yes.
O'Laughlin,
Yes.
Dudek,
No.
Corey.
No. So in this example, Mr. Pravati, I think we now have the required approval for that particular request that you had originally made. And the way the process works now is that you need to stay in close coordination with Mr. Simmons. I'm assuming, Mr. Simmons, this would go on the 15th, but I'm not 100% sure.
This will be scheduled for the first meeting of next year, the
Okay.
5th, I believe is the date.
So that's another reason, Mr. Propati, to stay in close coordination with Mr. Simmons, who can assist you moving forward. So we'll wish you every success with your project, and we'll wish you and your family a very happy holiday season, and thank you for your time this evening.
All right, thank you all for all your considerations.
You're welcome. So, gentlemen, before we conclude, I'm going to ask Mr. Simmons to educate us on if we have other meetings coming up in January.
I have no active petitions that have been submitted. However, I've had conversations with a couple of individuals that we may have applications to be submitted here shortly, so there may be at least 1 or 2 cases for January, but nothing concrete at this point.
Okay.
Are they also on Mildred Avenue?
There is one that is testing the waters down there, yes.
All right, gentlemen, before we conclude, let me just offer to you and your families happy holidays, happy new year. Thank you for all of your great work this year. It's been certainly an interesting year. And unless there's any other questions or comments, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much, gentlemen. Meeting adjourned.
Happy holidays, gentlemen.
Happy
Happy
holidays to
All of
you guys.
you.
So that was a tricky one.